What is biblical submission and what is it supposed to look like? Is it just an old-fashioned wives thing to do?
Keep watching because today we're going to talk about what submission looks like practically in the life of a wife.
Hi everyone, it's Alisa
And Jen
from Captivated by Him. Today we're bringing back the topic of submission.
That is such a good topic.
Sure is. And in this video, we will talk about what biblical submission looks like, specifically towards husbands.
Wait, even if you don't have a husband, don't leave just yet. If you hope to get married and have a husband, or are interested in what God has to say on this topic so you can counsel and encourage others, this video applies to you too.
That's right. And you're going to want to know this because this is a subject that matters a lot to God. If you've been following us for a while, you may have seen our previous video on submission when we talked about how a beautiful woman is submissive. And if you haven't seen it, we'll link it for you down below. In that video, we talked about how submission is the act of someone who acknowledges God-given authority and willingly and joyfully arranges herself accordingly. It is to voluntarily follow someone's leadership. It is to obey, put under, be subject to, and to surrender will.
In the Bible, God talks about the submission of a wife to her husband, which means that submission is not just some old-fashioned idea that women are subservient to men. Instead, God designed women to be under authority and to submit to their husbands. In fact, submission in marriage reflects how the church submits to Christ. So let's look at Ephesians 5:22-24.
I can read that for us. It says, "Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything." This is not a picture of a tyrant and a slave. This is a picture of Christ, the loving leader, and the church, which humbly submits to him because it is the best thing for her and the most glorifying to God.
Whoa, that totally dispels the common misconception that the submission of a wife to her husband is some misogynistic display of male domination. Christian women, do you believe that Christ is a loving leader who has authority over you with your best interest in mind? That's the way we should think about the leadership of our husbands over us too. We shouldn't begrudgingly try to please our husbands, all the while grumbling about wanting our own way. Rather, we should joyfully and willingly submit with smiles on our faces, follow and trust the leadership of our husbands, and defer to them because the authority they have is from God.
Right, Jen. For me, there have been times I'd want to prioritize certain things in me and my husband's schedule, like mounting decorations on the walls of our house, for example. But Brian decides it would be best to prioritize other things in our schedule first, such as getting ahead on preparing for ministry or getting adequate rest for the next day. So the house decorating will have to wait until a later time. These are small ways I joyfully yield to his authority in my life instead of complaining and nagging him to help me put things up on the wall. I know that I can not only trust his decisions, but ultimately trust God who has put that position of Brian as my husband in my life.
That's a great example, Alisa. Thanks for sharing that with us. We can be women who biblically submit to our husbands and joyfully focus on how submission is indeed a good thing that honors God. But maybe you're thinking, it's really hard to see my husband as a leader whom I can trust and follow the leadership of. He is nothing like Christ. Or maybe he's not even a believer. So if your husband isn't a good biblical leader, does that mean you don't have to submit to him?
Not at all. 1 Peter 3:1-2 says, "In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior." We are to submit to our husbands not because they themselves are good leaders, whether or not your husband is a believer. No one is perfect as Christ is. But if we are to submit to Christ, we must understand that God is sovereign over all things, including who we marry. He has placed our husbands in our lives and given them authority over us, knowing that they are imperfect and will make mistakes. But regardless of that, we can honor our husbands and ultimately honor God through our submission.
And that's so different from what the world tells us. A submissive woman looks very different from the loud and boisterous women of our society today. Feminists trample on men, and so many TV shows depict strong women who undermine the masculinity and leadership of their husbands. In fact, the reason why it's hard for women to submit to their husbands is because of the fall, which happened in Genesis 3. This was when sin entered the world. Satan tempted and deceived Eve, and that plunged the world into spiritual darkness that it's in now.
That's right. And one of the results of the fall is mentioned in Genesis 3:16, which says, "Yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." The wife would now reject her perfect, God-given role as a submissive helper and try to be the leader instead. She would rebel against her husband and cause contention between them. But that is not God's design for marriage. Instead, we are to let our husbands rule and lovingly and joyfully submit to him. And when you respect your husband and submit yourself under his God-given authority, it's actually a powerful testimony of how you ultimately trust God and obey him in all circumstances. And if you have an unbelieving husband, we're going to have another video that dives deeper in this topic of how wives can submit to their husbands. So stay tuned for that.
And this principle goes for believing husbands too. Just because your husband is a believer doesn't mean he's perfect, and it's always easy to submit to him. Sometimes he'll do things that will make you think, why would he even think of that? But some awesome advice that a friend gave me was sometimes it's just a preference thing. If it's sin, you can gently appeal to your husband, but if it's not, don't nag him. If he makes a mistake, it's not the end of the world, and don't say, I told you so. But you can still lovingly support him, submit to him, and have that gentle and quiet spirit that has peace because he trusts in the Lord.
That's really good and practical, Jen. Instead of pestering our husbands to do things our way, we can defer to them, trust them, and keep supporting them even if they mess up. And as a result, that can build up their biblical masculinity, leadership, and let them know that we love them.
Yeah, God has given us precious roles as wives, helpers, and supporters. It may not always be easy to submit, but that's God's wise design for us as wives. He's put us under the care, authority, and leadership of our husbands. If this video helped you understand biblical submission, then please give our video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos on biblical womanhood. And until next time,
stay captivated. Told you so. It's not submission.